Okay, so just a quick introduction of myself. I'm Shen, and I'm the founder of Work-Life Balance. I'm also a physiotherapist by training, but I'm actually more into the movement-based stuff. So my intention of actually inviting Holly onto this kind of like talk show interview thing was to really give her perspective and her opinions on running. I'm sharing her personal experience with this whole like having a child, like being an athlete. How does that change in terms of in terms of her body and all that little things that we are not, like, I guess women should be more aware about before we actually get to that stage. I think Davina and I were, when we had the interview yesterday, we were sharing about, I was sharing with her about how like I was telling a lot of my friends who are, I guess, like, first, we're not married, but we are all active. And I was telling them, hey, you guys should join us in this interview. And a lot of them were like, but I'm not pregnant. But I'm like, no, you really should, you really want to be informed before you even like have a kid, because there will be all these things that will kind of like hit just really suddenly, and you probably want to be prepared for it. So my I guess, like, I would call you my co-host today, Holly. Okay, Holly. If some of you might know her, some of you don't. Okay, so she's pretty much a very, like, we make Davina and I made a little joke about it yesterday, which is she said Holly is very holistic. She said you're one of the most holistic coach around, I think. And I think you really look at you really look at things very, very like holistically. And but I guess Holly's interest, in my opinion, is in a lot of like the pregnancy and postpartum communities. And I think she really wants to look at the holistic care of women before, during, and after pregnancy. Right? And she's also really focused on helping like childbearing folks navigate the physical and emotional aspects of their transition to parenthood and shifting their relationships to athleticism. She's also really experienced, having had 12 years experience in the fitness industry. And I know some of you guys know her background, like she's also a scientist. So that makes her like both like evidence-based, evidence-informed, and also like practicing, I guess, in the fitness industry. So I think that's really cool. And that's something that I really like respect about her, where she's always quite grounded in science, but also being very realistic about some of the things that she does for her clients. So yeah, like, maybe tell us a little bit more about your story, Holly. Just jump straight into it.
I'll let you which part of my story? No, so it's good. It's good. I'm trained as a biochemist. I worked in research for about 8 years. I have my PhD. When I finished my degree, my husband, who is essentially Singaporean, and I moved back to Singapore, back for him and for me here for the first time. And we thought it was going to be a short-term thing. So I looked a little bit for science jobs, but at that point I was kind of burnt out on research, and I was not really that 2-year science posting at that point in my career was going to be really hard to find. And while I was trying to figure out what I was going to do in that professional sphere, I had a lot of time on my hands. My husband was working a lot. We didn't have any kids. This was 2012. And so I basically I had been coaching runners back in the US, and I had been working with a running store there. And so I basically said, well, I don't really know what the landscape is like here in Singapore, but let me see. So I built a website. I started looking for clients, and I had a lot of time, and I thought I was going to go back into research. So I thought I would just dabble in it for a little while to keep me busy while I was applying for jobs. And I just had a really good response here and from folks back in the US. Even at that time, the idea of working online was a little bit newer, but it was still definitely possible, and the tools were in place. So it kind of took off. I had former folks from the US, and I had new people in Singapore, and I got so busy and started having so much fun doing what I was doing that I haven't been back to the bench since then. As far as it's funny that Davina says holistic, because I started as a runner. When I was in grad school, I was a runner. And that was all I really had time for besides my work. So I ran, and that was good. And then I had more time, so I ran more, and I had more time, so I ran more. And then I got hurt, because that's what happens when all you do is run. And that was kind of what started me on a path toward diversifying what I was doing. So I definitely started in movement as a specialist. Coaching endurance runners, basically. But as time went on, I diversified what I did personally, and then that filtered into the work I was doing. And I would say I definitely take a more. I'm now a generalist. You begin to change your practice, and you get some more education, and become a bit less believing in one way only, I would say. And so, incorporating strength training, working on the bike, working on mobility, and just kind of accumulating information and seeing what helped people. And really, really working hard to fill a sphere that I didn't really see that much, that being filled that well in Singapore. When I started as a running coach, it was running. It was run coaching. And I do still have some folks I see exclusively for run coaching, but I really think I've really broadened what I work. And I say I like to serve folks that aren't served by a typical gym setting. So the typical big box gym, Fitness First, Virgin Active is going to be great for a subset of people, and they're going to be really well served by it, and that's awesome. And then there are a lot of people who aren't really going to feel like they have a place there for any number of reasons. And those are the folks that I like to see for lots of reasons. And as much as it might aggravate my business development, advisor, that I don't have a really specific niche. So Davina, I have to laugh when you say holistic, because she says niche down. You need a really narrow niche. I would say that really I just want to help people move better to meet their goals, which sounds really broad, but can mean a lot of different things. So for some people, it really is the running. They come to me for running. They want to meet a time. They want to meet a distance, and that's very specifically what we drill down on. The cool thing is that I can pull in my other bits of information. So we do certain activations or certain stretches, or we can pull in lots of different things besides just running. But the focus is running. For some folks, they want to be able to, they're preparing for a trek or a hike or a Spartan race. So, we work on whatever they need for that. I do, when I got pregnant and had my daughter, I definitely developed a keen interest and went on a information-seeking adventure in the pregnancy and postpartum, and that's how I got started working there. So, for some people, it's just being able to do certain activities symptom-free, or they want to be able to lift their kids up, or
what would you say you have more of, like, currently? Like, do you see more like women now that you're like? Because I kind of like mentioned, like, one of the things I feel like I guess like I kind of put you together with a lot of like women, like somehow, like, like empowering women. I kind of feel like there's a lot of that vibe. So I actually don't know how many men and women you kind of like work with, but I always think like, Holly seems to me more of somebody who would really nurture women through this like pre, during and post-pregnancy thing, and just kind of like taking them throughout this journey.
So my what I would say, Sharon, is in the past like 5 years, the way I've worked with folks has constantly shifted. Before I had my kids, I saw a lot more people in person for running stuff. I had my daughter, and I had Elle, and we started doing more things online, and I brought even more work online. And then and so the balance of what I do has shifted a little bit based on where my kids are and what their needs are. But I would say, no, I wouldn't say, I know that definitely the majority of people I see for running or non-running, training are women.
And how much does
I think there are quite a few reasons for that. Without we don't have to. This could be an entire cast in itself. But I think when you're a female coach, who at this point in my we'll get to this, I think. But at this point, I'm not on the podium anywhere. I'm not running competitively. So I think, in general, women tend to seek out coaching more. and particularly in an endurance type sport. I would love to talk to Davina about this. But in certain types of sports, I think that men, for whatever reason, may inherently trust a male coach more.
Yeah.
And I don't want to draw any broad. I don't really want to draw any broad strokes here. I would say right now about 20 and 25% of my clients are men, and the rest are women. And some of that is because people are seeing me for particular postpartum, prenatal situations. And I think the other is just that women tend to seek out help in an athletic sphere sooner.
Yeah.
You know, I work with some folks who are looking to run a 5K. They want to get started and build that running habit. Those folks are almost exclusively, no matter where they're from, they're almost exclusively women.
Yeah.
And that has nothing to do with my postnatal training or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's just that, frankly speaking, men don't tend to seek out help for that, for that kind of endeavor.
Yeah. Understand. But how much do you talk about like let's just say, for example, if somebody new coming to you and I would just say maybe she's in like maybe around my age, like I'm 29 this year, and I'm like, you know, I just want to run, right? How much does the whole idea of like, you know, Sharon, like, are you thinking about, do you have any other like women's health type symptoms? How much does those conversations come up? Like this, like, so I guess locally versus like, I don't know, like overseas, is there a difference? I'm curious like about that. Like,
so
do you talk about it?
So all my incoming clients fill out an intake form. And on that form, I do ask them about pregnancies and deliveries and a variety of symptoms that would be related to pelvic floor or, you know, symptoms, because those, I mean, we're talking here specifically about pre and postpartum, but those kinds of symptoms can actually manifest in people who've never had children or who are 10, 15, they don't consider themselves postpartum anymore. You know, they're 10, 15, 20 years beyond. So, and I would, anyway, whether or not that's still postpartum is a conversation for another time. But I put that in my screening for everybody. And I mean, men have pelvic floor issues, you know, have struggle with certain kinds of pelvic floor problems. So, you know, that's in my intake form for everybody. How we proceed from there, and usually after I take in a client, I'll either, when someone is interested in starting, we'll either meet in person briefly or we'll chat on the phone. And once I see their intake information, sometimes I'll ask them to elaborate a little bit. And there's a few different ways that could go. So people who have been pregnant, no matter what happened with that pregnancy, I will ask about it a little bit. And I think like anything, it's a little bit art and a little bit science. I'm kind of reading off of them. What's their response when I ask them these kinds of questions? And I don't jump in with the, because they're not seeking me out for pelvic health information or for pelvic health help specifically. If they haven't mentioned that in why they're coming to see me, I'll approach it a little bit carefully. So, you know, it's kind of read what their response is. And sometimes there's a whole range of responses there. Right. Sometimes I can very quickly get a sense that someone's not interested in talking about it. Sometimes they'll talk openly, but it seems that everything is checking out fine. And sometimes people are upfront about symptoms, and we kind of take the conversations from there. You know, sometimes, and again, I think there's definitely, this is a place I've changed as a coach. I think if I had this information 8 years ago, I would have just dropped it on everybody like a ton of bricks. But I, you know, in my, I guess, age experience, I don't know, developed a little more finesse about it, I would say. And I can even appreciate that some people may not be ready to open that conversation right away. And we get started. And you know, if someone is coming to me, we are generally, depending on where they're starting, but we start with simple, you know, we start simply, and we need to build some rapport. I see a lot of my clients not in person, even before the pandemic. I work with a lot of folks online, and it takes a bit of time to develop a relationship before people are willing to talk about some of these things. And, you know, is it ideal that they run for a month or 2 months with symptoms before we actually get around to talking about it? I don't know what's ideal, right? If I crush in too fast with tons of questions about this kind of stuff, then some people will immediately clam up, because we're not accustomed to having these conversations. I mean, I am, but
yeah.
most people aren't. So, it really, I can't give you a really 100% like, I always do this, because there's no real formula for it. It depends how people respond to me and my questions. Everybody gets the questions. And there are definitely certain red flags that there are a few things that I would immediately tell someone: you need to be evaluated by somebody else before we work together, because I don't feel comfortable proceeding. But there's a lot of gray areas where we can work a little bit, develop a relationship, give some suggestions, get some feedback, get people comfortable saying the word vagina. And then, we can kind of proceed from there.
Yeah.
I definitely think there's you had asked about culture.
Yeah.
I definitely think there's a difference. Women's healthcare, I mean, I'm an American, so that's where my background is. Although I delivered my kids and everything in Singapore, so I know that end of the system in Singapore. I think women's health care in general, and a lot of things relating to women's bodies, are still not in a very progressive position anywhere, including the US. So it's not like people are seeing, pelvic floor physios regularly. It's not like they're referred every time they deliver a child. It's not like, people are regularly teaching their children the correct anatomical language. There's certainly people who are, but it's really not that common. But I think there's even more taboo out here. And I'm very cognizant of the fact that I'm not local, and so there may be a little bit more required to develop comfort and rapport before people are willing to talk about more sensitive topics.
I think the downside is that a lot of people only recognizes that some of these symptoms are present, like only after like pregnancy, right? Where they start to go like, oh, this is not normal, but then not recognizing that even before they might already had some of the symptoms, but they didn't see it like, oh, that was like a pre-existing issue. They kind of thought like, oh, my pregnancy became, but then if you dig a little deeper, a lot of them had like pre-existing issues as well. But I guess like for you personally, as an athlete, like going into like having your first kid, was there a big shift in how your body was, or what was it like for you in terms of like being an athlete and then going into pregnancy? How much of that has changed in your body personally?
Are you talking about mindset? Are you talking about physical? Are you talking about where do you want me to start?
Oh, that's tough. Start wherever you want. I think maybe let's start with the just go at it with like your experience with being an athlete, and then what your body was like going into pregnancy.
Right. So before when I fell pregnant with my daughter, I was both working in fitness and I was training. So I was about 6 months off my best marathon time. I was seeing folks in person to coach, and when I would see someone to coach, I'd usually run with them. I would need to look back at my training log to know the distances I was logging, but we're probably looking at 50, 60 miles a week, long runs on the weekends. And I was teaching 8 or 10 cycling classes a week, and I was teaching some yoga. So I was a little bit of strength training. So movement and fitness, and that was my work, and that was my recreation, and that was my socialization. As I said, at that time my husband was working a lot. He wasn't in town a lot. So that was my community, and that was really basically everything that I did. I had work that I enjoyed, and I had a hobby that connected me with people and that I enjoyed, and that was where I was putting all my time. It for me, it was not, it did not interfere with my falling pregnant with my daughter. So that was fairly straightforward for us. It's not the case for everybody. So, kind of circling back, that's also a question that I do open with people if and when we get there, because those are important discussions to be having also. But my pregnancy was pretty straightforward with my daughter. I gradually scaled back my teaching, and at the time I was just learning about, I didn't do a lot of pre-pregnancy education about fitness and movement. I think I took a very black and white couple hour class somewhere in Singapore, and thought, okay, well, this is fine, and kind of went on with things. And during my pregnancy, that was when I connected with like Brianna's course and Jesse's course, and started kind of educating myself more, and observing kind of how your own body is sort of your laboratory too, right? So I went in really fit and strong, and I continued moving a lot. I did scale back. I scaled back my running until I was about 5 months pregnant. I stopped running. It wasn't really comfortable.
Were you exercising through the first trimester?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that's cool. Okay. You stopped at 5 months, the 5th month.
I stopped running at 5 months, but I didn't. I mean, I was working. I was working in fitness. That was my job. I was working with, one of the big box companies at that time. And there wasn't really like an option to not, I mean, I guess I could have stopped working completely, but I was teaching some Les Mills. So that's all demo. You do the whole workout. So yeah, I was cycling about 8 or 10 hours a week. Indoor bike. And I was running a bit as well. But I really had a very easy pregnancy, to be honest. A little bit of discomfort in various ways, but I generally felt better when I was moving and teaching, and I kept doing it. Like I said, I scaled back my running, I scaled back my weights. Obviously certain positions and things stopped feeling good after a while, and I was teaching regularly. So I had regular classes. So, I was teaching yoga, but I just I demoed less, and I just talked them through more things. And I was pretty comfortable and confident in what I was doing. I had an idea for how I was going to deliver my daughter. I taught my last class, literally the last class I was scheduled to teach on December 31st. And then she was born on January 3rd. Ooh. So I finished teaching like just a few days before she was born.
Wow.
Yeah.
Pretty hardcore. Yeah. And you were okay throughout,
I scaled back. Yeah. So I scaled back what I was doing. I lightened my class load as I got further along. But I lightened weight. I demoed more and taught less. I, reduced, I scaled things back to ways that seemed like they were comfortable for me. And, even sitting here now, what I did, I don't second guess what I did. I scaled things appropriately for my body at that time. I am not saying that if you're fit, you will definitely be able to do that. Or if you were, the last thing I want to do is hold myself up as a model. Because that's absolutely not what I'm saying. And I almost hesitate to share this part because I don't want anybody to compare themselves to me, because that's not a fair comparison. Every pregnancy and every body is completely different. Jumping ahead in the story, when I was pregnant with my second, I was not in the same place professionally. I had left the gym and I owned my own company, and I had moved a lot of my work online. My life was very different because I had a kid already. But there's no way I would have been able to handle that through my second pregnancy. No way would I have been able to do that. And maybe it's because it was a second pregnancy, or it was just a different pregnancy. So I please, anyone who's listening, and, I know Sharon, I know, don't hold that up as a standard. In fact, in a way, I was almost a little bit sheepish doing it, because I brought this pregnant body in and put it on the bike, and it was my job and it was my work, and I enjoyed it, and I felt good doing it, but I was almost embarrassed to set a standard for other pregnant people because I didn't want to do that.
Yeah. But what's I think also going I as a rider would be looking at you and go like, oh my gosh, when I'm pregnant, I want to be like her. So what would be your advice to people who are sitting there watching you? Do you have conversations with them? Do you remember having conversations with them? I'm sure there will be so many people asking you questions, right?
Yeah. So I think, no, I don't think I know, Sharon, the most I would come home at the end of a day. And like I said, I was teaching about 15 to 17 hours, 15 to 18 hours a week at a gym. And I was in different facilities. I was at the same company, but different facilities. So I was seeing, different groups of people. And I said to my husband, several times during the last, 3-4 months of my pregnancy, I thought that what was going to be tiring was like the athletic part of it. But what's actually exhausting me are the conversations. And I want to set the right example, but I want to set a good tone.
Yes.
Do I,
like, what would you recommend like women to do? Like if, like that, in that state of mind when I am like young and probably like impressionable, and absolutely had no idea what to do with my body, and maybe already having some sort of like pelvic floor issues, like spinning too hard, running too hard and stuff, and me looking at my instructor and going like, hey, yeah, I'm gonna be like her when I'm pregnant. So what's your advice to young impressionable women like us in I guess in terms of how do we progressively become like you? Like what sort of baseline standards, what sort of expectations should we have? How should we build up our body? Like, what do you think?
Become like me in my mindset, or become like me in that you can ride a bike until you're not 8.5 months pregnant? Which part do you want to aspire to?
The second part.
Yeah. So my response there is you don't always have control. I mean, you always have you always have the ability to make a decision.
Yep.
But there are parts of pregnancy and postpartum and life in general, but particularly pregnancy and postpartum, that you don't have control over. Yeah. So you could be working with someone and you could be doing your pelvic floor exercises, you could be strengthening, you could be learning how to relax, and you could still have incontinence when that baby gets to be 4 or 5 pounds and is pressing on your bladder. And there are certain things that you probably might want to reconsider doing. You might want to consider not doing. Yeah. And that's, in a sense, that's the luck of the draw.
Yeah.
And I think there are a few things that I often tell people. And the first one, Sharon, is that I can't make any guarantees that you or anyone else will have the same progression that I did. Right. Mine was a little bit of education, a little bit of fitness, and a lot of luck.
That's true.
In that sense. And so the phrases that I often come back to, and a lot of this does come from Brianna Battles's course. You control what you can, and you can only control what you can control. Yeah. Right? There's a lot of stuff that you can't control. So you can make the best fitness, movement, strengthening, relaxing choices that you can. You can seek out work with professionals. You can see a pelvic floor physio. You should be doing all of that stuff if you're having symptoms. But you may still have symptoms when you do certain activities. Yeah. So, I hate this cliche, but that's like part of the introduction to motherhood, like the surrender of control. Yeah. Just get ready for it, because once the baby's out, you have even less control. So I think that's the first thing, is that, understanding that there are factors that you can control and there are factors you can't control, and you can only make and the second one is information, is an informed decision. Right. And this is not a conversation that can be had in 2 minutes after class, but that I can present to you the pros, the cons, the cautions, but ultimately your decision is yours. If you want to put on a pad and ride your heart out and leak, that's your decision. And you may have a lot of reasons for doing that I may not really know. And in caring for your physical self, I may not recommend it, but in caring for your overall well-being, that may be the best decision for you on that day. And I can't always know that. As a professional, that's hard for me to say. Yeah. Because in some sense, I want to take care of your physical body. But, again, circling back to this holistic thing, one of the hardest adjustments for me in coming into this kind of coaching was understanding that it's not just, that my scope goes beyond just your physical body. I have to appreciate that my clients, whether or not they share them, have a lot of mental and emotional things going on as well. and if you are using that outlet to cope with anxiety or depression or, stress, maybe, there's 100 things that could be happening that I can't appreciate.
Yep.
Maybe that's your stress release outlet and that's helping keep your blood pressure in check.
Yep.
Well, that's a good thing for you and the baby. And maybe a little bit of leaking isn't the worst thing that could happen. Maybe
Yeah,
I could tell you should meditate instead, but that might not work for you, right?
Yeah. I think that's something that's very interesting, because it's the same with like any sort of injuries, right? Where sometimes it's like even if it's not pregnancy, it's just pain issues, right? People get so like I remember like having an athlete tell me like you should just tell me that I need to do high intensity foam rolling because I need to do something that's high intensity, and I'm like, really? And like I remember that so vividly because she actually broke down in front of me and said like, I really need to do something that's high intensity, and you could have told me to do high intensity foam rolling and I would do it, And I think like Laurel just asked a question like, how do you communicate effectively? Yeah, without them feeling any shame or guilt. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about, which is like this whole anxiety thing, this mental health thing. So do you have any thoughts about what her question? Yeah.
So the way I read Laurel's question is related to what I presented when I was standing in front of a class.
Yep.
And in that situation, it's a little bit different from a conversation I would be having maybe with somebody after class. What I presented in front of a class, and again, this is in large part what was exhausting to me about putting myself out there. And at that time, it's interesting, the gym that I worked in now has had a number of subsequent instructor pregnancies, but at the time I was the only pregnant instructor. I was the only pregnant instructor. And this is a gym with 16 or 18 locations. So I did, and I didn't have I had mentors and information for what to do physically, but I didn't have anybody who was modeling how to do exactly what Laurel is asking, which is how do I present how do I educate my riders to not necessarily, or my client or my members to not have to live up to my standard, but to still basically do what I needed to do my job because I was, feeling well. And I would say I did a couple of things, and again, a little bit of this is cultural. So I will acknowledge that in general, when it comes to pregnancy movement, there are kind of two opposite camps. And one is like, I've done it before, I did it, so I'm going to keep doing it. I can do it all the way through pregnancy. And you hear that from doctors, and you hear that from coaches, and you hear that from pregnant individuals. And the other one is, I'm pregnant, I'm going to put my feet up, and I'm not going to do anything but grow this baby for 9 months. Right. And those are kind of the two camps, the two extremes that people fall into. And, my messaging in general is that there's a lot of middle ground in there, and we can do a lot with that middle ground.
Yeah.
But, in terms of how I presented that to my client, to my members, there was the group that sort of believed, we'll call them the auntie group, that I was going to like pass out on the bike. They thought I should be sitting there with my feet up. Yeah. And, and that's, Laurel, I recognize that's not where your question is, but I would often start class with, and again, I was teaching classes where I had a lot of regular attendees, so they were accustomed to seeing me. And so I would often start class with with a little bit of a disclaimer, especially once I was obviously pregnant, like, yes, I'm pregnant.
Yep.
I may make some different decisions than you today, so I want you to follow my voice and not necessarily what I'm doing. But I don't need you to worry about me. I'll be making the choices I need to take care of myself and my baby. The last thing I will do is put either of us in danger. So please focus on your workout and don't worry about me. If you can't do that, go to another instructor's class. Yeah. Because that's the honest truth. If you really believe that I shouldn't be on the bike, then you're not going to be able to enjoy your workout because you're going to be worried about me. And that's not good for any of us. So that's sort of the first camp. As far as putting forward a moderating, expectation, even before I was pregnant, I worked in some situations where I would teach, for example, back-to-back classes. So I teach 2 cycling classes and a yoga class. And I would even tell my second cycling class, sometimes I'd have people stay on, and I'd even tell them, like, look, there's no reason you need to take 2 indoor cycling classes unless you're training for, like, you know, some particular event, right?
Yeah.
I'm doing it because it's my job. And I am prepared for it physically, but there's really no benefit to you in general for most of you in taking 2 cycling classes. And so I flat out tell them that. And that was before I was pregnant.
Yeah.
So people were accustomed to me sort of shooting straight, if you want to put it that way. And, you know, so oftentimes it was honest, and sometimes it was more for the show. I would say, you know, okay, I'm not going to do these, you know, and I was teaching Les Mills programming. So we get the choreography. I didn't have a choice in what I was teaching, so to speak. That comes from the company, and we teach that. So rather, you know, I couldn't really adjust that, but I would sometimes, there were certain parts in class where I started to say, look, I'm going to talk you through this, and I'm going to demo one, and then I'm going to watch you, and you're going to do it. And it was a fine line, and this is a professional issue, because in Les Mills, like 95%, you are required to demo. So you're required to do it with the class. And I'm sure that no one from LM headquarters is ever going to see this. So I'll openly say that I didn't do that. I would often sit out parts of tracks. And I would tell the class I was going to do it. So I would set them up for success, and then I would model moderation, or, you know, stepping back by skipping some parts. And I often did it because I was more comfortable that way, or because I wanted to, but sometimes I just did it so that they would see an example of me not killing myself through it. And the same thing was true in yoga. You know, I would demo something. Davina, please don't. It's okay. Actually, I haven't taught RPM in about 18 months. So I think we're all clear.
Are you intending to go back?
I wish that there was someone in Singapore who opened a cycling studio that I could get behind, because I miss teaching indoor cycling like crazy.
Holly, just a note. Today we are on live on Facebook as well.
Like I said, I don't think I'll go back to Les Mills. But I do, and if anyone wants to be honest, I did it in the middle of a class. I did it in an open studio. Like some of the spaces were open. They were open to the gym. Anybody could have recorded me. I was in good conscience I joke mostly. I was in good conscience doing what I was doing, and would have defended myself to headquarters.
It makes sense. You know, it makes sense.
And so I would do similar things in my yoga classes, and for example, this is a more extreme one. I taught a hot yoga class. It was not Bikram. We were not at 42 degrees. We were at about 38.
39,
and I would say, look, and I live in Singapore, for anyone who's tuning in from abroad. So, you know, temperatures up to 33, 34 degrees Celsius are not out of the question for me in my daily life, right? And I would tell the class, look, I would never suggest that at 7 months pregnant, you take a hot yoga class. Like, in fact, I would probably invite you to leave my hot yoga class if you were 7 months pregnant. But I'm not going to do everything you're going to do. I'm very comfortable with what my limitations are. And this is my work. So I'm going to teach the class, and I'm going to make some adjustments, and I'm going to keep you safe, and I'm going to keep me safe. And so, you know, in those situations, that was probably the most extreme kind of example, where I would never have advocated somebody do what I was doing, or take the class that I was teaching. I would have no problem if you were an instructor and you did what I did, because I stayed in very safe realms for myself. And I would, you know, it comes up differently in every kind of class. When I'm teaching yoga, I'd say, look, you know, could I stretch further? And I often talk to my yoga classes, for example, you don't have to get to 100% maximum stretch. Right. So I'd say, look, right now for me, there's no way I want to be at my maximum stretch. Am I still getting a benefit? Yes. I'm sitting in that 60, 70%. Maybe you want to be in that 70 to 80% stretch spot. None of us need to be at 100. Definitely not me. So, you know, in ways that lent itself to class, I would put it in there, frequently in a context that was related to stuff I talked about anyway.
Yeah.
Right.
Are there anything that you would consider absolute contraindications? Like not just for yourself, but just generally for people who are doing like spinning or yoga? Like, is there anything that you think would particularly you would highlight to them, like, please don't do this at all? From a general viewpoint, like.
Are you talking about symptoms that I would suggest that they stop taking class, or particular movements within a class that I would suggest they not do?
Symptoms. So I think maybe like, because we're kind of like talking about like things like, you know, as somebody who is conditioned, and then for somebody who is like, basically, if you're not an instructor level, you might not be as conditioned as I am.
Yeah.
Is there anything specific you would want to highlight, like just at this topic, where people should be very, very aware of if they are first like pregnant or, you know,
Right. So in pregnancy, we're looking at things that would raise a medical flag. Bleeding, later in pregnancy, understanding different kinds of contractions, dehydration, staying really well hydrated. Like those are more like on the medical side. And I mean, there are medical conditions, placenta previa, for example, but generally folks who've been flagged for that have already been told by their doctor what they should and shouldn't do. So in general, that's less of an issue because they, like I said, they've typically already been flagged by a doctor. Blood pressure, for example, high blood pressure. So there are things that fall in the medical realm, and those are basically no-goes, like 100% absolute no-goes for me, because I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to, you know, we're not going to go. And similarly, post-pregnancy, I could go on and on about the 6-week clearance, but if you don't have clearance from your doctor to move, I think that is definitely not enough, but you at least need that. And if you haven't gotten that, then I don't want to see you in class.
And is it just from a doctor, or would you also want them to like see like a physiotherapist? Like, what's your preference?
What do I want, or what do I require?
What do you want, recommend, and require?
So I require, in a class, I'm going to require that you have your 6-week clearance. Everyone I'm seeing postpartum, I would prefer to see a pelvic health physio, but I'm not going to require that. That's not always accessible. That's not always comfortable. That's not always, there's a lot of reasons. And I'm not going to put up that barrier to someone accessing help.
Yeah.
As we go through, there are certain, you know, things that I might flag that say like, okay, you really do, you know, you really would benefit from a physiotherapist, physical therapist assessment. And when I work with people one-on-one postpartum, I do sometimes see people for I consult with people on daily life movement before their 6-week clearance. And that's things like, I can't get out of bed without discomfort. It hurts to pick up the baby. You know, how do I, you know, how can I get the infant out of the crib, or how can I, you know, how can we set up my house so that it's more accessible, so that I can, you know, when I, you know, so things like that. But that's not, I don't consider that to be like fitness. That's just daily life. And the people are doing those things anyway. And that's kind of where the difference comes for me. If you're doing it as an add-on activity, then you need your clearance. You need your clearance for that. If you're doing it as in like, I need to survive and to care for this child, then we need to do something about that. And oftentimes oftentimes again, a women's health physio is a good referral, but it's not always an accessible referral for everybody. In Singapore, we have tons of privilege that makes it more accessible, but particularly like in the US, not everybody lives near to somebody that has this kind of specialization. Not everyone has financial access. Not everyone has, you know, there's a lot of barriers. And so, you know, if I can help somebody, if I think someone will be better off with, you know, a little bit of help, then I will, you know, do what I can. Okay. We've gone really far from the original question, I think, which was what would someone say to me in class where I would say, you shouldn't do this class? Is that was your original question?
So it's like what is your threshold of like contraindication or like your precautions that you would like take 100%. But I think I like where the conversation went. Like, you know, like going into, you know, like, so it's okay.
Okay. Do you want to, where do you want to go?
Let's go down the post-pregnancy route. You know, like I kind of like where we were at in terms of like really going back to the return to sport and clearance of the 6 weeks and checking out with a physiotherapist on that. And I think like, I mean, from where we are, like what is most of the, where is your, I guess your main clientele, let's say for post-pregnancy? Are they usually early on, or do they normally see you at like, not
right
very
now,
early? Yeah.
Right now, later. Right now, later. I'm setting a terrible COVID-19 example. My nose is so itchy right now. I keep touching my face. From a health perspective, I have to tell you, I recognize I'm doing it. My hands are clean. I
put on a mask, Holly. Put on a mask, and you won't touch it.
So right now, I tend to see people a bit later on. And that's for a couple of reasons, I think. The first one is that I haven't made a really strong effort to recruit new clients, cold clients. Yeah. I haven't done a lot of social media work on it. Yeah. I just haven't done it for a variety of personal reasons, really more than professional.
Yep.
You know, I mean, I guess the slight backstory in that is I was working about half-time run coaching and half-time at the gym. I decided to, I basically decided that I was going to leave the gym and go out on my own and turn Run with Holly into Movement Labs. And I found out I was pregnant with my second in like the same week. And so
double celebration
or terror, but you know what, be that as it may. So I made the decision in October 2018. 18. Yeah, because the baby was born in 2019. So I made the decision in October 2018, and then I left the gym at the end of the year. So starting 2019, I went full-time into Movement Labs. But I did that knowing that I decided to leave the gym and go full-time before I found out I was pregnant. But by the time I left the gym and gave my notice, I knew that I was going to be taking a sort of maternity leave, like in July. So in terms of building business, I was not as aggressive as I could have been because I knew that when the baby was born, I was going to take a little bit of a step back. So I haven't really set out to recruit tons of new clients even since then. And I get a lot of folks from word of mouth. So currently, I tend to see people a little bit later, and that's for a few reasons, I think. First of all, a lot of people aren't seeking help immediately. They don't, especially, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. Okay, this is normal. I just had a baby. 5 months, 6 months, 7 months, 8 months. Okay, maybe it's not normal. 9 months, 10 months, 11 months. Okay, yeah, maybe I should do something about it.
Yeah. What are the reasons people come to you? Is it mainly like, I wanna start losing weight? Is it mainly like I have issues, like, or is it like I want to run? Like, what are the main reasons people like seek out your help?
Postpartum is return to activity, and that's often tied in with body image.
Okay.
Yeah. I do still have a subset of people that come to me exclusively for running. They don't present with pelvic health issues. They've never had kids. They're a long time postpartum. Things seem to be checked out pretty well. And we basically proceed just with running without much extra, I don't talk about Kegels with everybody. I don't even, to be honest, some of my runners, we don't even talk about, intra-abdominal pressure in those words, right? Because it's not manifesting as an issue. They're not telling me it's an issue. When I ask, everything seems to be fine. So, I'm not going to, sometimes, what is it? Occam's razor, right? Sometimes it's not. Sometimes I'm not going to go seeking out problems. I want to make sure people are well and feeling good, but I'm not going to go, seeking issues.
Seeking issues is my job.
Maybe.
Oh.
So I would say that's, you know, I do, so I have people who come to me exclusively for run training for whatever, you know, whatever particular, you know, distance, time, whatever. And we work exclusively in that realm. So the two big groups that I work with, oddly enough, are endurance athletes, and I work with them on their endurance training. And then I try to get them to buy into mobilization and range of motion and control mobility kind of stuff. So, you know, and supplemental strength work, right? So I have the sort of the ancillary things I work with them on. And then the other group of people I see are typically pregnant or postpartum. And postpartum, they're looking to get back to some activity. And frankly, it might be running, but that's not what drives my being a running coach is not what drives people to me. And I typically get people referred from current clients or former clients, and I get people referred from physiotherapists who want to kind of progress their athleticism beyond what their pelvic floor physio is doing with them, women's health physio is doing with them, and I take them from there. So the situations vary a little bit, but I do tend to see people later on. I wish that I were seeing people earlier, but you know, that's an education campaign, and I just haven't really embarked on it much in Singapore yet.
It is challenging. Yeah, it is challenging. I think Phoebe had a question earlier, which is from a business perspective, what are you doing or planning to do to capture the next business opportunities in women's fitness? Big question. So, I'm like,
that's a great question. Yeah. So you know, to be totally honest, what I absolutely love doing is coaching. What I don't love doing is managing my social media and advertising. And I'm still working on that. I'm still working on that forward thinking part of it. You know, honestly, Phoebe, I think a lot of it is going to depend on what the next year actually brings. You know, there's a question about there's a question of me personally, and there's a question of what's going to happen in the industry. And I'm not sure for me personally, one of the reasons I went out on my own is because I'm looking actually to set up physical space. We're not exactly in the ideal time to do that right now, but that's definitely something that's on my radar. And that's just because for me, this all ties into community, and there's online community, but there's physical space community. And I see that really necessary in the pre and postpartum spheres. And this is women who don't have much support, women who used to have, we haven't gone here, and we're coming up to 9:30, so I'm not sure we're going to get there. But one of many transitions that was really hard for me to grapple with as a new mom was that I basically lost my fitness community, because I wasn't going out to run for hours on a Saturday morning anymore. And I wasn't going out to the track on Tuesday night with people. When I did return to run training, I was doing it on my own, because I had a business and I had a baby and I had a husband who traveled, and I couldn't meet somebody else's schedule. I could only do it on my schedule. And so I lost that part. And I think that lack of community was in some sense really difficult for me. And I really, my expertise is not in community building, but my expertise is in movement. And I know that movement is powerful for building community and connection. And so for me personally, that's really kind of a passion. That's the passion part of my project, because I think people do connect through movement. And definitely there's a space for online communities, absolutely. But I think in-person communities fostered through movement, if you're a runner, like when I was actively running, I could go travel somewhere and join a running group and drop in on a running group, and basically you'd start talking to people that you just met about stuff you would never talk to someone you just met face to face over, I don't know, cheese and crackers. But somehow when you're moving, when you're running, when you're working out, there's some like bond and connection there. And so I do think when you foster these spaces where people can move together, and again, my passion now is moving into this like pregnancy, postpartum field when you start to foster spaces where people can move together, where people can bring their children, where conversations about vaginas and incontinence and pelvic pain and sex are not off limits. When you start normalizing that and bringing people together in those spaces, I think that can be really powerful. And so for me personally, from a financial perspective, that may not be the wisest business move, but from a personal perspective, that's something I'm really passionate about, and that I don't think exists as it could here right now. So personally, that's what I would say. I'm also really curious and interested to see what happens in the online sphere. My community of colleagues who work in pregnancy and postpartum are largely in the US. Many of them are functioning without a lot of childcare. They have little kids at home. And so this entire shift to online has been really interesting for them and for me. I think the possibility, I said to my husband, I came out on Saturday, I did 2 classes on Zoom, and then I did a one-on-one client session. So I was basically in my side room, my baby's room, that's now sort of where I teach from when he's not asleep. I did 3 sessions there over 3.5 hours. Like, I could never do that at the gym. I could hardly do that in a physical space. Nobody had to check in or check out. Nobody had to use a locker. Nobody had to, they just showed up and we worked out together, and that was that. And so I think there's really fascinating possibility there. And I'm not sure if the end of, and nothing is going to happen overnight, but as we move away from COVID, which is probably going to be many months, if not years, I'm really curious to see if people are still attracted to the online space, because that's also, there's a lot of possibility. And, as Sharon, I know you've had this experience as well, like kind of being kicked into doing stuff that you'd never really thought you were going to do. I'm really interested to see how that develops as well.
Actually, that's actually a really good point. Like, I think to be honest, it's like in this season, you start to question the need of a physical space. It's almost like if it gets there, like if you allow your thought to get there, it's like, oh wow, this online thing actually really do work, right? And people, but to be fair, like, I think in no time I'm just gonna be like, oh my gosh, I can't go back online again. Like it's just I think it's just how I guess it's how we kind of like adapt as well.
Yeah.
And just make things work. Yeah. Cool. Okay, we're kind of like 9:30 mark. So I think I just have one last question for you.
Sure.
I know this is like a little bit of a big shift back to like the running thing. I think I understand, like if we talk about like running specifically, like even though you don't see many people like early on, but I do know many people who start running on their own very, very early.
Oh yeah,
without any guidance. What is your thoughts about that? Like, is that something that in your opinion is safe to do on your own? Is there any recommendations on what sort of signs and symptoms you should look for and stuff like that?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, my first answer, which everyone hates to hear from any, movement or health professional, is it depends.
Words? Yes, it depends. I knew it. I was like, is it 2 words? Is it 2 words? I knew it.
It depends. And there are always mental health and emotional aspects that I don't know when I give a broad recommendation.
Yep.
Right. So with that asterisk, I would say if you're only looking at the physical, then if you're out running before 3-4 months postpartum, maybe even 6 months postpartum, that's kind of early.
Even 6 months. Cool.
It depends. I would say, and again, if any of you who are watching or listening or tuning in anywhere, turn this around and say, Holly said, don't run until you're 6 months postpartum, I will seek you out and we'll have another discussion about it, because that's not true.
That's not what she's saying, guys.
But, when I do see people out, and honestly, my perspective has changed my belief is still 3 months, 4 months is very early to be out running. When I first had my daughter and started, learning about all of this, I would say, no, don't. No, what's wrong with you? Don't do that. Don't put it on social media. What are you doing? You're, that's it. Stop it. And now I would say I have a little bit more nuance there and say, like, I hope that, you know, I or someone else can help you find other coping mechanisms to help you kind of get a more holistic care, so you don't feel like your only recourse to getting away, getting out, getting stress relief, feeling better is running. You know, which again circles back to this. There's so much that goes into it. When I'm looking at just the physical, there are a few benchmarks that I'm looking for people to meet before they're heading back out to run. And those that includes, and it really is really basic foundation building. So I'm looking for you to be pain-free, of course. And that would include, you know, if your pelvic floor, your abdomen, any scars that you had, if you had a C-section, like all that stuff should be healed up, obviously. Yep. I'm looking for freedom from pelvic pain when you're moving. And we can assess that in a lot of different ways. You know, I'm looking for you to have built up, hopefully, some strategy for a little bit of information and strategy for managing your intra-abdominal pressure. Yep. And not everybody, a lot of people don't know what that means. So some people, it's not an issue. They don't need those words. They get it. For whatever reason, they're, you know, again, that's that luck part. Like it just, things are okay. And then I'm looking for people to have done some work on their glutes. Done a lot of like split stance, single leg work. Can you balance on one leg? Can you do split squat? Can you lunge? Can you do some light hops? Can you do a little bit of gentle jumping for low durations? You know, and this is all like progressive loading, and I can't tell you what you need specifically. I mean, not you, sure, but like what someone needs specifically. But you know, we want your butt to be strong. We want you to be stable on one leg, and we want you to be dosing in your impact very slowly. And progressively. It's like any kind of overload training. And then when you get started, and this is sort of one of the hardest things for a runner to accept, you are not the same. You're the same person. Okay, but you are not the same runner.
Athlete. Yeah, you're not the same athlete.
Who stopped running at 4 or 5 months pregnant. That person may have been able to go out and run for an hour. The person that's starting running again at 5 months postpartum probably shouldn't be going out for an hour. You need to go back to your basics and rebuild. And that means something like, you know, when I'm starting somebody, this is super, you know, I want you to be able to walk for 30 minutes without symptoms. We're looking for symptoms like pelvic pain, abdominal pain, back pain, incontinence, leaking, like all that, those kinds of, those are the big ones. Can you just go out and walk for 30 minutes? Can you do a brisk walk? Like quick moving, swing your arms, heart rate up. Can you do that for 30 minutes? Can you do 30 seconds of running and 4.5 minutes of walking? 30 seconds of running, 4.5 minutes of walking. And then we're just super gradually building up the running and taking down the walking. And it's really a question of figuring out what your threshold is. What do you tolerate before you're symptomatic? Or where do you become symptomatic, and how can we build just below that? And what do we need to, what is your symptom, and what do we need to do to address that? So, you know, for some people it's kind of endurance in the pelvic floor maybe. And so then we work on addressing that. If it's, you know, certain kinds of pain, maybe it's stability, maybe it's your glutes, maybe it's your, you know, in your feet, maybe we need to do some strength work. So it depends, but I always encourage folks. I mean, my clients, not to brag, my clients are you know, my clients know, but you know, for anyone who's hasn't had any guidance, right? I would encourage you to be looking at those things as benchmarks, and getting some advice from someone, to be honest. And as hard as it is to wrap your brain around, you are the same person. Your person is separate from your athleticism, even though they feel like they're married to each other sometimes, I know. You know, but to respect where you are, and remember that things will always change. The impossible, symptomatic, leaking, crappy run you try to go on at 5 months postpartum is probably not, with good help and advice and work, is not the one you're going to have at 8 months, at 12 months, at 2 years postpartum. You know, I did not have a particularly, we won't go down this road right now because we're running out of time. We've run out of time. But, you know, I did not have a particularly damaging delivery. It was difficult, but it wasn't particularly damaging in a medical sense. But it still took me to 18 months to 2 years postpartum before everything felt more normal.
That's a really long time, actually. Yeah.
When you're living it, it feels like a long time. In the trajectory of your athletic life, it's a short time.
Yep.
And if someone had said that to me at a year postpartum, when I was like, what? I mean, I would have probably smacked them. Because in the middle of it, it feels like forever. And I also don't want anyone to be listening to my advice and thinking, I'm never going to talk to her about this because she's going to tell me not to run. Because one of many reasons I do this work is because I feel so strongly that the difficulty of understanding, trying to accept where you are and what your body can do, and that is going to change. Yeah. Accepting what you maybe can't do or doesn't feel good or doesn't feel right or feels different, knowing what to do to change that, and then realizing there can be, you know, our bodies are always changing. I don't ever want to say you get back to normal, because I don't know what normal is. Whether I had a baby or not, I don't have the same body. Even if I had not had 2 kids, my body now wouldn't be the same as it was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. You know, I've jammed my finger and I've stubbed my toe and I've, you know, wrenched this knee and that hip is like funky. Right. So, you know, our bodies are always changing. When you grow and deliver a child, it changes a lot. But, you know, I would hope that I guess my perfect world hope is that all athletes who go through pregnancy and postpartum periods can have access to a coach and professionals who can truly understand what they're going through, because it is about what your body is doing, but it's about so much more than that. And it can really shake you in many, many ways. Yeah. And if you're working with someone who doesn't really understand or respect that, and you don't feel like you can talk to about that, then I would strongly encourage you to reach out, not necessarily to be coached by me or Davina or Sharon, but let us help you connect with someone who can connect with you over what your sports are. We have networks and we have colleagues we certainly know somebody who can connect with you for your need, right? Yeah. I'm never going to sit here and say I can help everybody, because I can't. But I have colleagues who work in many different ways and who understand what it's like to be an athlete and to be going through this, you know, tremendous transition. And you shouldn't have to feel like you're alone, because there are those of us out here who get that.
I think there's the other extreme population who don't recognize that these things are actually problems. You know, I think that's the other like big group where, you know, it's going like, you really need to slow down, like, you know. So I think that's where, like, we do see a different population between like a physiotherapist and like a coach. I think Davina also mentioned yesterday that some of the clients that she sees, they usually come with a sort of problem, like either like they want to lose weight or they have some degree of pain, and they just believe that getting stronger is going to help them. And then we have the people who come to see physio, and sometimes they're just like, no, I can't do anything anymore, or like they just get so fearful about things. And then you have those who come and then they just go, oh, so it's not a big deal. I'm like, no, it is a big deal, you know. So I think there's just this huge gap of like education, and there's this huge gap of like, I guess, information failure to a certain degree. So there's still a lot of education, and I think in the women's fitness specifically, there is so much potential.
Absolutely. And I think, it's kind of just to go off of that, I think you're absolutely right. And there are so many reasons that people perceive it differently. And I think the psychology of a diagnosis can be really damaging. That you have pelvic organ prolapse and what that means, particularly depending on the professional who's delivering that, right? That can have huge negative impacts on people far beyond what the actual physical diagnosis, which doesn't actually mean that much anyway, would mean. And I think, again, if you're working with someone who doesn't understand that or doesn't respect that, then you might want to seek out someone else because that's kind of insensitive at best. But I think we also have to understand as professionals that we might educate up one side and down the other, and people may still have different perspectives.
Yep.
I may work with somebody who is going to leak at the end of a race.
Yep.
And I may give them some things they can do to work on. We may try to train below threshold. They may do it. They may not do it. They may do the training. They may not do the training, and they don't think it's a big deal. And what am I going to say? Right? To some people, that really just may not be a problem.
Yeah.
And I don't like saying that, really. And I struggle with accepting that as a professional, but that's okay. True. If I believe that people have autonomy to make a choice, then that's their choice too. And I can present information, and I can, but there's also, we won't go here, but there's a hell of a lot we don't know. Right? That's about true. Long-term implications of various things. Mm-hmm. And, as you said, I'm a scientist, and there's, like I said, there's research. Laurel, I know you're on here, so there is lots of research. What it means is a bit less clear sometimes, and there's a lot that we just don't really know. So, I don't want to fearmonger anybody into anything either. And I want to, at the base of it, I want to respect that my clients are people who have brains, and they can also choose to make decisions, with that, and, accept that, basically.
All right. In terms of time, we are a little bit tight. Does anyone have any last questions? Rating wants to know more about Kegels. Hey? Kegels are interesting. We should do a talk about Kegels someday.
Absolutely.
Pelvic floor.
Riking, they are, gosh, what a three. My top 3 things about Kegels. They're something, but they're not everything. Please seek out help to make sure you're doing them properly, and get some information about whether or not you need to be doing them. Or relaxation is just as important as squeezing. How about that? We'll go with that. Those are my top 3 Kegel. Those are my top 3 Kegel takeaways. But you'll have to come back for another session if you want to know more.
Any more questions, guys? I think Wendy has left the chat. Cool. That was cool. That was productive. We covered a lot. We did.
Don't Kegel everything.
Thank you both. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So this talk, or at least I'm gonna try to do a couple more of these talks with different people, not pertaining to women's health only. But I think I do want to cover a little bit of like high intensity training type stuff. And to kind of like even for people who are prenatal and childbearing age, I think there are some things that we should generally educate people about, So if you guys have any questions, any feedback, please send them my way, or please let Holly know how we can improve if we do a couple more of this in the near future. Yeah.